Hello dear viewers, welcome on our special program. We have observed International Women's Day on 8th of March. The theme of this year was Time is Now, Rural and Urban Activists Transforming Women's Lives. This theme focuses on women's rights, equality, safety and justice, and also empowering women in all settings from rural to urban. So we have picked up a title for this special program, that is Women's Right. We will discuss state of progress we have made in Bangladesh with taking into account the global context and challenges for us ahead. We will also discuss protection of women's rights, state of gender equality, and before going into discussion, let's meet our three important guests. Let me introduce them. Let's begin with my immediate right, Ms. Asa Torkelson, Country Representative, UNFPA. Welcome, Ms. Asa Torkelson. To my left, let's introduce Honorable Ambassador of Sweden, Charlotta Schleiter. Thank you very much for joining this show.
Thank you. And
to the extreme left, Ms. Shoko Ishikawa, Country Representative, UN Women Bangladesh. Welcome, Ms. Shoko Ishikawa. We have already celebrated International Women's Day all over the world, including Bangladesh. This year, I found that UN Secretary General, he has given a message, and he said that achieving gender inequality and empower women and girls is the unfinished business of our time. And he also said it is one of the greatest human rights challenges in our world. That is the statement of the UN Secretary General. So let's begin with UNFPA Country Representative, Asa Torkelson. What is your view about the progress we have made in Bangladesh and what we can do to challenge those, improving the state of women folks in Bangladesh?
Thank you so much for this big question. Bangladesh has come a long way in its growth and its prosperity, but unfortunately for many of the women, there are some development gains that still await to be realized. Also in terms of education, Bangladesh has come a long way in assuring education for all. However, if we look later on, for example, in secondary education, we see that still some girls are dropping out. So there are some challenges, even in terms of the prosperous labor market that exists. Women are actually still a little bit underrepresented. Unfortunately, the issue of violence against women is also quite present. So from the UNFPA, which is the United Nations Population Fund agenda, we are striving to assure that every childbirth is safe and that no mother should die while giving birth, and that every adolescent's life should be realized. And there, as we empower girls from very early ages and throughout the course of lives, we still have some unfinished agendas in terms of addressing adolescent, for example, pregnancies, and a large number of marriages also taking place before the age of 18 still. In maternal mortality, although some good progress has been made, there are still some gaps. Bangladesh right now is at 170 maternal mortality rate per live 100,000 births. We are aspiring that by 2030 that number should be at 70. So those are some of the issues. And then throughout women's lives in workspaces or in educational institutions and in public spaces, to ensure that we can go to a situation with zero violence against women. And then also that there will be zero unmet needs in terms of family planning needs, so that anyone who wants to make a decision on reproductive situations can have that ability.
So you are working in wide range of issues in dealing with the women's rights.
Exactly.
Ambassador Charlotte, as I have mentioned that UN Secretary General's term, this is one of the greatest human rights challenges in the world, not even in Bangladesh. So after arriving in Bangladesh, how do you see the overall situation in terms of, dealing with women's rights issues or gender against women folks, inequality, violence against women folks in Bangladesh? What is your observation?
Well, thank you for that question. And I want to underline that indeed after arriving in Bangladesh, I'm a newcomer here. I've been here only since September. Yes. So I'm commenting from that background. Okay. But I think something that's struck me since I came here is that there is a very strong civil society generally in Bangladesh, and especially in the area of women's rights. Lots of women are active, and that explains also that there have been strides, and I think compared to other countries in the region, Bangladesh has come far. Sexual and reproductive health and rights, for example, is such an area. Some concerns and something that we're particularly looking at is the prevalence of child marriage still has a big impact, I think, in girls' life in terms of being educated, and so it's hard not to mention that as a major challenge.
I'll come back to you again. Ms. Shoko Ishikawa, you're representing UN Women in Bangladesh. There are so many gigantic, so many titanic challenges. I see that in all forms of discrimination against all women, eliminate violence, trafficking, sexual and other forms of exploitation, eliminate all harmful practices like Ambassador mentioned, the child marriage, early marriage or forced marriage. There are so many things around you are also dealing with in Bangladesh. What is your observation?
I think I'm also a relatively newcomer. What had struck me in Bangladesh is that, in fact, you actually have quite a lot of good laws and policies in place.
There is no dearth of policies and laws.
True, yes. And in the area of gender equality and women's empowerment also.
And even our constitution enshrined equal rights.
Correct, yes. And you have a diversity of policies. You have policies around trying to address violence against women. You have policies around trying to provide more skills training for women, specifically on more non-traditional areas. You have policies around enabling access of women to the digital economy. A lot of these are in place. But I see where the challenges are. It's about the implementation of these policies. And it's about whether the government has enough capacity in place with the right orientation in terms of the implementation of the policies. So if you take violence against women, for example, there's a law on domestic violence, but the conviction rate is extremely low. The cases that go to police are often dismissed. And that is because of whether the police force and law enforcement officers are trained to sensitively handle these cases. Without the care and encouragement that the survivors need, they would not proceed with the case further.
But whom do you mostly accountable for this?
It is
lack of enforcement.
It is the government's accountability. That is clear from international human rights standards. Also, the government has an obligation. The government has signed on to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. You know, the Beijing Platform for Action. SDGs also, SDG Gold 5, talks about ending violence against women in all forms. And if you take a human rights-based approach, it is the government's responsibility to make sure that all parts of the government are able to act upon these commitments. So there's still a lot to do in terms of changing the mindset within the government also, so that the laws, the well-written laws, are actually going to be practiced on the ground.
But when we talk about changing the mindset, what are the critically important aspects of how to change the mindset of the society? There are so many social and cultural barriers also in changing social mindset of human being. So how to do that?
It's a very good question, and there are also so many opportunities to change mindsets, and it's happening every day. And we see that in the work that we do to support the government. For example, in establishing the profession of midwives, delivering the new Bangladesh.
Yeah.
This is a new profession, and women are coming into this
a remarkable number of midwives being produced.
Are being produced, and they are then empowered, and they are changing mindsets in their families, in their communities, and in the whole society. So that is one example, and also traveling to the remote areas of the country to serve in unserved areas, and therefore really providing an essential service. And I'm thinking about other initiatives we can do. We have a project working in 300 schools, particularly with boys and girls from very early ages and also adolescents, on how we can look at gender relations and interrogate our roles. And I know that we talked to them. It was a boy who was educating in one of our adolescent clubs, and he came out from this awareness raising transformed as a young man of 15 years old. And he said that he was made aware of how big the inequalities in his household was after having been alerted through the training. He said, why is my sister eating the rest of the food and why am I given the first piece? And he started to interrogate within the household, and then his father and mother, and then they started to interrogate the neighbors, and then in the end they started asking, so why, you know, my sister should also have the same education, and all of that. So I think we can see in many of the works that we do that spirals of change are happening, and that each and every individual actually has the power to be the change that this world needs. So this is a remarkable also opportunity, and it's happening now.
Ambassador Charlotte, there have been so many goals or targets have been set out in the SDGs. You just mentioned about SDGs, and so many programs also in place. But I mean, in terms of supporting Bangladesh government, what do you think the international community, the partners, how they are standing by to achieve all those goals or targets?
No, I think that a lot of the development actors and the UN organizations are engaged in gender equality related activities together with Bangladesh, because it's so important. Yeah. And in the development cooperation that we as Sweden have, we have a long tradition of working together with Bangladesh in Bangladesh. Okay. We also work on sexual and reproductive health, for example. We're supporting especially the profession, the midwifery, the development of training midwives. Okay. It's been tremendously important in Sweden. Almost every child in Sweden is born not with through a doctor, but through a midwife. At a hospital, but through a midwife. It's been important for Sweden, therefore we're supporting the activities of training midwives here. So that's just one example. But if I can also mention the involvement of men and boys, I think, to change hearts and minds. I mean, sometimes it's as if we don't credit men with understanding gender equality. Of course men understand gender equality, and generally also want gender equality. And that's been the experience in Sweden. If I look back at the most important reforms through the history of Sweden has been those which have made it possible for men and women to share family responsibilities while being engaged in the labor market, such as parental leave for both men and women.
Okay. Shoko, we heard that UN Commission on the status of women is going to meet in next couple of months, I think.
Couple of weeks,
yes. What are the issues they are planning to discuss on that commission?
This year, the Commission on the Status of Women is focusing on empowerment of women and girls. And that's taking from the promise of the Sustainable Development Goals to leave no one behind. If you look at rural women and girls, they are the furthest behind. Because of their gender.
They're the quarter of the world world total population, the
Right.
rural women?
Well, in Bangladesh, it's about 74%,
74%.
of women are in the rural areas. And but because of their gender, because they are women, because of their geography, because of the remoteness, because of lack of infrastructure, services access, they are the ones that are left furthest behind. So all the UN member states will be gathering in New York for this Commission on the Status of Women to talk on this specific topic of how can we work further to make sure that the rural women and girls are supported. And this is in many different dimensions. It is in the dimension of work, making sure that decent work opportunities are available, social protection measures reach them, talking about violence against women, child marriage issues, also talking about educational opportunities, sexual reproductive health, right? So looking at a woman's life comprehensively and seeing which are the different pieces that we could pick up on and do further.
We mentioned at the beginning that this year's theme is "Time is Now." I mean, why? But is there anything to celebrate? I mean, why they have picked up the urban and rural activists to celebrate? Is there any remarkable progress from UN perspective that to celebrate?
I think the time is now takes off on...
We know that they have been working tirelessly, the activists, relentlessly working to promote the interest of the women, women folks. But
I think
still we're lagging behind for...
In the past year, I think we have seen a phenomenon of women stepping out and talking. The Me Too movement that we have had, where women have bravely stepped out and talked about the fact that we can no longer tolerate sexual harassment, sexual violence. I think it has taken the women's movement to the next level. And that's why we're celebrating
And that has been seen very phenomenal progress.
Right. And this activism is the source of progress of gender equality. There has been studies that have been done of countries that have advanced in gender equality in terms of legislation. It's really because of the civil society movement. The countries that have a strong, vibrant civil society are the ones that have been able to put strong laws in place and strong measures in place. That's why we're celebrating that women's activism and trying to give it another push.
Inequality and discrimination is a congenital crisis in the society. So, I mean, definitely it needs to be, there has to be a concerted effort to fight it out. But countries like Bangladesh, she mentioned that 75 of the total population still women and lives in rural areas. So, how to get them out of that sort of stigma of, I mean, inequality and discrimination? It's a big and tough job.
Yeah, it's a big and tough job, and to reiterate from the UNFPA perspective, it is really to empower women from day one, and actually at the moment of birth, to be delivered safely into this world, and for a woman to realize the delivery situation safely and to not suffer any casualty, be it, you know, to risk your life, from preventable and treatable causes, such as hemorrhage, postpartum, and so on, which could be very easily preventable and treatable, and at also quite limited cost. And these challenges are, of course, larger in the remote areas. So therefore, these problems that we see overall are accentuated, and they are deeper if you move into the rural situation. And I think you can see also moving onwards in the life of girls. I'm not familiar at detail level on the situation, but in many other places, for example, girls in households, in farming situations, will be required to do so many jobs. To collect the water, to support in the weeding, to collect the firewood. They have so many tasks on top of their education. So some of the times it is not possible to do all of them. Then let us remind ourselves that the resilience of Bangladesh is very high. But the country, and your beautiful country, is tested many of the times a year with many challenges. It can be a cyclone or a flood. And the country is coming through that with resilience. But every such time, women have larger problems. We are seeing they may not know the information on early warning. Where am I supposed to go for safety after the cyclone? There is a call for that. Immediately, if women are made aware, they will go to look for their children or to look for their ruminants if there are cattle or goats or utensils to get into the safe situation. But while doing so, they are at accentuated risks. I'm anticipating that that kind of challenge can also be altered in a rural context where the information may be even more difficult to access and share. So there are challenges which are definitely, I've seen in other places, can be accentuated for rural women specifically.
From UN Women, what are the programs, what are the activities you have to support Bangladesh, specific in women's empowerment?
We have activities broadly in about 3 areas. We focus first on women's economic empowerment, and in that area we are trying to ensure that women have...
But I'm curiously, do you see that the contribution of women in the society have been taken into account very effectively in our economic process?
I think...
especially the contribution they make in the domestic front?
I think the women's participation in the economy has been growing in Bangladesh.
Remarkably growing.
Remarkably, but I think it is hitting a plateau. I think as you had developed your RMG sector, your economic participation rate grew very well. But the worrying trend that we are seeing that is not continuing to grow. The restriction that are put upon women is partly because of the heavy responsibility that women have on the domestic duties. When women have so much to take care of in the families, in terms of care work and domestic work, they have to balance that with the productive work that they could do, that they can go out and have a wage-earning job. Right now in Bangladesh, I think you have a disproportionate burden going to women in terms of the domestic work and care work. You also have many women in the rural areas in particular that are in family work environment, in family farms. So they're working, but they are actually not counted because they are not being paid. They're not in the paid economy, they are unpaid family workers. And that devalues what the women are doing. We have to create more opportunities for women to be able to have wage earning opportunities, to be able to work outside of the homes. And these actually also have to be work of decent conditions. For example, the RMG sector, I think there's much more potential for us to make it a work environment that women are properly remunerated. You have a wage gap also. For the same value of work that men are doing, women are being paid only 56% of what men are being paid. Again, you're undervaluing women's work. If we could value women's work the same as men, I think your GDP will be much
greater. Are there any
greater.
Significant move or any significant effort to take them into account?
I do understand that the government is putting an effort into skills building, and I think that is good. Skills building and job creation, particularly focusing on women, I think is very important. And in the areas where women can come out of the often low-paid, low-skilled jobs, but into the 21st century jobs where that would also drive what kind of education women need.
Ambassador Charlotte, you mentioned about the Swedish government's support for Bangladesh. Is there any specific programs or any specific actions you are taking for supporting Bangladesh?
In the area of gender equality, certainly. We're working, as I think I mentioned, but in the area of child marriage. It's a small project, but looking at what policies and what actions might lessen the risk that young women get married, and so that's one area. Sexual and reproductive health also I've mentioned. Skills building in the textile sector we worked as well. So a number of activities, but I also want to mention the dialogue, government to government on gender equality, because policies on gender equality do also have to come from the government, and our own experience is that policies matter. If you make...
Has there been any remarkable progress?
There's been some progress, yeah.
Bilateral dialogue on gender equality and these issues?
I mean, I think when you have a dialogue, you don't always measure it in preciseness, but you measure it in the quality of the dialogue and the ability also to inspire and talk about your own countries.
Do you find the goodwill of your counterpart?
I think so. I think so. And I mean, at the Bangladesh Development Forum, also the point that we were making was that you have gender equality as one of the priority areas, but really you have to have gender equality up front in all of the policy areas, because that, you know, it's important not to make gender equality a segment, something that some people do in some areas, but it has to be something that everybody does in all areas. That's when you can have an impact. And for us, we have what we call a feminist foreign policy. Started about 3 years ago. It's not, doesn't mean that we started focusing on gender equality then, but we started with the foreign policy because there was a sense that unless you assume that everything you do in foreign policy and in relation to other countries also has a gender dimension, you're going to miss that opportunity of putting gender equality front and center. So we're actually going to have...
How do you see the civil society role in Bangladesh in promoting...
Enormous, enormous. I think it's been key to the progress that you've made. And it will continue, I think, to be key to the rest of the journey. So, of course, I think we should all encourage civil society to continue their important work and listen to them, because they work at the levels where we're not necessarily there and can understand what's next and what's the right thing to do. So I think that will be very important.
And political goodwill?
Political goodwill is huge. And
do you think the parties are making enough room or space for women in their political process, in their political structure? Or
well, it's hard for me to say.
There has been so many promises and
certainly we would encourage them to do so, because it's key. We're actually going to have in April something called the Stockholm Forum on Gender Equality, middle of April, and we will have, I know some participants from Bangladesh, but I think this is also going to be a good opportunity to discuss with lots of countries present. Okay, I mean, yes, we have the Commission on the Status of Women, but we need more fora where we can exchange views and give one another suggestions to move on.
We see no dearth of goodwill from the apex level from our government, especially from Prime Minister. We have seen that our Prime Minister attended a Girl Power conference in the UK a couple of years back, and they have been passionately pursuing and talking about all those pressing issues. But when you, like UNFPA, you have always been discussing how to eliminate child marriage. As Ambassador also mentioned a couple of times that ending child marriage is a very key goal to achieve. But in Bangladesh, is it still in do you think still in alarming level? Early marriage or forced marriage or child marriage in Bangladesh?
To me, the issue is for us to empower girls and to, in that process, expand the horizon for their room for maneuver and to make their own choices and delay that point up until a desirable point. I think the last figures are that 60% of girls marry before the age of 18. And so by empowering girls and women, that should translate into a situation where women and girls themselves can make the choices. What we do see from a reproductive perspective is that adolescent pregnancy rates are the highest in Asia, actually, in Bangladesh. And that is actually a signal from our perspective of unmet family planning needs in the adolescent group. I think overall in the country there is an unmet family planning need of about 12%, but in the adolescent youth group specifically, that need is around 17%. So that probably...
So where the problem lies, is that lack of education in reproductive health?
I think it's a combination of access to the facilities, that's the areas in which we are working, but also in knowledge about what the options are. So it's a combination, and we are working very closely with the government on in these areas. So the expectation is that automatically that can, that child marriage can then be delayed. We see it also as a form of gender-based violence, because it's a form of limitation on women's choices, and unfortunately figures are high in Bangladesh. Globally, they are also high. 1 in 3 women in the whole world are actually suffering from violence.
Okay, but to stop gender-based violence or to arrest gender-based violence, what are the measures? Say some are arguing or advocating for ensuring the participation of men in dialogue to end gender-based violence. Is there any significant effort to integrate the men in the dialogue to end the gender-based violence?
Absolutely. I think the example I was mentioning a little bit beforehand is from our initiative early on in the schools to enter into the life skill building process of adolescents early on in their adolescence, and include men and women early on to interrogate gender roles. And we are doing that already in 300 schools, and with remarkable results in terms of men starting to really question some of the models that they spring from. And we think that this can then trickle down and lead to big changes, actually almost self-propellingly. So that is our expectation. And of course, embedded in that changed or transformative practice is that there should be no violence against women. Women are free to live in societies, in families and communities with zero fear for being, for being exposed to violence. That is our aspirational number: 0 violence against women.
But the approach of the families is also something to worry about, right, in Bangladesh?
Sorry?
The approaches towards the gender-based violence, the role of families. How do you see the role of families in?
I think these ideas of gender equality, about the superiority of men over women, boy over girls, that is something that is formed from an early age in the family. So we already know from evidence that a child that is brought up in a family witnessing domestic violence, the son is at higher probability of becoming a perpetrator himself. If it is a girl, there's a higher probability that girl will be a victim of domestic violence herself, because she's been growing up seeing that this is what women should tolerate. So we have to work with families so that the girls and boys are brought up in an equal manner, just like we do the school intervention programs. In the school intervention programs that I've been involved in, we reach out to the parents also, because it can't be that the children are being taught in the schools that you have to be equal in your schools, but then they go home and see a completely different story. So the engagement of the whole of the community is required.
So it's not only an issue for law enforcement.
It's a multi-dimensional issue. You need laws, you need community-based prevention work also.
I mean, a whole society approach.
Yes, absolutely.
Ambassador Charlotte, we are just at the end of our program. So what are the message, based on your experience, based on your observation on the state of Bangladesh, how, what you want to say to our audience to ensuring women's right, to end violence against women, to ensure gender equality, and to stop or eliminate discrimination in Bangladesh?
Yeah, I think, and we've talked about it a little bit, I think to engage men and boys in this effort together. We haven't talked about it, but there's this campaign, the He for She campaign,
Yeah.
which is a UN Women-led campaign, and it's about actually men and boys making commitments, saying, I am a he for she, and this is what it means to me. And it could, for example, mean that you reject violence against women, which means that you would not engage in it yourself, but you would also tell others who do engage in it that it's not the thing to do. And you could make other commitments for more equal workplaces. If you're running a company, you could commit to a gender equal company and start your policies tomorrow.
Okay.
So I think the He for She campaign still has to get a major space in Bangladesh, but I would love to see that develop further. I think that would be one of many things that that could be done.
Just your last comment that we have been talking about, and Sustainable Development Goals says that leaving no one behind. Leaving no one behind. So how far we are from seeing everybody is in same place, in same dignity, in same status, especially the women folks in the society.
As mentioned, we've come a long way, and particularly on the Sustainable Development Goals that UNFPA is working on specifically in ensuring universal health care. But there are also still gaps to be met. But we can meet them. It is not undoable. They are not even super costly. And one thing, in addition to my eminent panelists or talk show members here have mentioned, is the role of the private sector. We are working, for example, even in workplaces, there can be forms of harassment, to ensure that the factories, the workspaces also take measures. But it would also be fantastic to see private sector engaging in making their commitments to also deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals, because they are also to a large extent those who are employing the women, those who we want to see employing the women, and to offer the good conditions for women to be employed, to prosper as workers, but to also have the ability to be a parent if they want to. And then to be able to combine their life at work with their life at home. And during the journey from their home to the workplace, to be feeling safe to move, and to not be living in fear of any form of violence or harassment. I think that day we will see the prosperity of Bangladesh fully capitalized. And for example, we call it the dividend of demography. It can be fully reaped at that point.
Okay. Shoko, your last comment. There's so many challenges, discrimination, violence, sexual harassment, trafficking, ending child marriage. There's so many things ahead of us. But I mean, where we are right now and where you want to see Bangladesh in the coming years, at least by 2030?
Well, of course, by 2030, we have to go to zero discrimination and zero violence against women. That's the commitment that we all made. And I think that underlying all of those issues that you have raised is really that social awareness and the consciousness. And we have to really crack the nut of behavior change. People's mindsets need to change. When we can think of men and women truly being equal and being released of all of this gender stereotypes and the social expectations of what a woman should be like, what a man should be like, it frees both genders. The men are more free also to say that they actually want to participate more in the family life, in taking care of their children. Right now, men are stigmatized for trying to do that, but we have to make that possible for men also. And for women to say that they want to actually be in the corporate world, become a leader, we have to free the society of all of these boundaries that have been set based on gender. And if we can do that, I think many of the issues that you have laid out will start to change.
And that's not a very distant dream, we hope.
Hope not.
Hope not. Thank you very much, Shoko Ishikawa, Country Representative, UN Women Bangladesh. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ambassador Charlotte Schleiter. And thank you very much for joining me. And thank you very much, Asha Torkelson, Country Representative, UNFPA Bangladesh. Thank you all. Dear viewers, that's all my conversation on women's rights. International Women's Day is not the country and Bangladesh also only observed. It has been observed globally, worldwide. The day belongs to all groups collectively everywhere around the world. So together, let's all be tenacious in accelerating gender parity. Collectively, let's all work for progress and amplify our effort to empower women and ensure their rights and choices. Thank you very much for watching this show.